Take your time. You wait for it. Sorry. No. Everybody ready? Good afternoon. I'm Josh Shapiro, honored to serve as Pennsylvania's Attorney General. Proud to be here today with three members of my extraordinary team in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. Our Executive Deputy Attorney General, Jennifer Selvig, our Senior Deputy Attorney General, Dan Dye, and Special Agent Steve Adams. I'm profoundly proud to work alongside them day in and day out to fight for justice all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Also joined today by several survivors and supporters of those survivors. Folks I've gotten a chance to know over the years, and folks who inspire me every day. They're my heroes. Jim Van Sickle is with us today with his wife and daughter. Jim Faluzic is here with us. Bernie and Cindy Leach, who are here with us, and we remember Corey together today. Other survivors who made the trip to see what they just saw in the courtroom just moments ago. 8 months ago, I announced criminal charges recommended by a grand jury against David Poulson, a Catholic predator priest, for the sexual abuse of 2 boys in the Diocese of Erie. A diocesan priest abusing victims who were just 8 and 15 years old when their abuse began. He assaulted one of the victims more than 20 times, usually at church rectories or after Mass on Sundays, where one of the boys was an altar server. Poulson weaponized his faith and used the tools of his priesthood to abuse children here in Pennsylvania. He even made one victim go to confession and seek forgiveness for being sexually assaulted. The priest who heard that confession was Poulson himself. In addition to the assaults on church property, Poulson also assaulted this victim and attempted to assault a second victim at a remote hunting cabin he owned with a friend right here in Jefferson County. Today, finally, justice was served upon David Poulson, a priest who preyed on children for his own sexual gratification. Poulson was just sentenced by Common Pleas Court Judge John Forador to 2.5 to 14 years in prison for his horrendous crimes. As some of you know, I was in the courtroom with our team and this group of survivors. It was a powerful moment to see justice brought down on that predator priest. The prison sentence imposed on Poulson is significant. Understand, these are difficult cases. Far too often, predator priests either have not been charged because their enablers manipulate the statute of limitations as church officials cover up their crimes to protect the institution instead of victims. The stiff sentence imposed today on Poulson sends another very clear message here in Jefferson County and all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and indeed I believe people across this country are listening, that the era of institutional cover-ups has ended. We will not stand for it in the office of Attorney General. The church, putting its own reputation above the needs of children, we simply will not stand for it. The charges against Poulson were recommended last May by the 40th statewide investigating grand jury, the same grand jury that issued the report back in August. The grand jury found that the Diocese of Erie under Bishop Donald Troutman knew since at least May of 2010 of Poulson's predatory tendencies, but they did nothing to report him to authorities until September 2016 in response to a subpoena from the grand jury. Troutman himself, the former Bishop Troutman himself, interviewed Poulson in May of 2010 And Poulson admitted to the bishop that he was aroused by boys. Despite knowing of Poulson's admission, the priest was allowed by the diocese to continue in ministry until he was finally suspended by Bishop Persico in 2018. For more than 7 years, the diocese allowed Poulson to remain a priest, even though they knew he was a predator. They allowed him to stay there as a threat to others. The jail sentence Poulson received today will finally bring a sense of justice to 2 of these predator priests' victims. In his victim impact statement, victim number 1 detailed how Poulson's offending on him has impacted his life. Quote, David Poulson affected my life in more ways than I can count. It has cost me my career and my marriage and my daughter, victim 1 wrote in his statement to the court. Because of this man's actions, I have suffered for years from mental anguish. I ask that true justice be served on this day. Victim 2, whom Poulson attempted to assault in the hunting cabin here in Jefferson County, wrote moving words that were read aloud in court today by our outstanding prosecutor, Dan Dye. His statement speaks to the deep sense of betrayal that he feels toward Poulson. Quote, I convinced myself that the road trips, gifts, and dinners were just you being a friend, victim 2 said in his impact statement directed at this predator priest. But it was all for an ulterior motive, he went on to say. You used your position of a man of the cloth as a way to manipulate young boys. I trusted you, and in return you tried to take advantage of that trust. This is important. Victim 2 went on to say, I hope that this sentence will bring some justice, some closure to anyone who has been victimized by this man. The courage of those 2 survivors, the courage of the survivors who grace us with their presence here today is extraordinary. These survivors, as I said before, are heroes. And so while not every victim of clergy abuse across our Commonwealth was in court today or represented by those 2 specific victims you heard from, I hope they received some sense of closure today as victim 2 hopes, as Poulson was led off to prison in handcuffs. I hope that these survivors know. I hope that these survivors feel that people are listening. We are listening in the Office of Attorney General. People of Jefferson County are listening. People of Pennsylvania are listening, and indeed the whole world is listening and believing their truth. No longer do they have to keep it inside. No longer do they have to live in shame or secret. They are the heroes, and they are the ones who deserve to be heard, and we are listening. I've heard that from victims here in rural Pennsylvania. I've heard it from survivors in Pittsburgh and in Erie, and victims from every corner of this Commonwealth who stopped me, who stopped Jen, who stopped Dan and shared their truth with us. When the statewide investigative grand jury identified 301 predator priests across 6 Catholic dioceses here in the Commonwealth, the criminal statute of limitations in place sadly prevented us from charging nearly all of these predators. I said at the time, and I'll reiterate today, we ran each of those living 301 predator priests through a statute of limitations test. Sadly, because of our weak laws here in the Commonwealth, only 2 could be charged. Poulson, who you saw today, and John Sweeney of Westmoreland County. Sweeney previously was sentenced to prison, in fact it was last month, for sexually assaulting a 10-year-old boy while he served as a parish priest. He is now behind bars. In our earlier investigation into clergy abuse in the dioceses of Altoona and Johnstown, we held 2 Franciscan friars accountable for endangering the welfare of children by failing to take action to prevent a predator friar from sexually abusing more than 100 children over several years. For failing to take action. These two Franciscan supervisors were among the first clergy members in the United States of America to be held criminally liable for covering up sexual abuse of children by other clergy. The release of the report in August has sparked a movement and a reckoning in this country. Our clergy abuse hotline has received more than 1,450 calls since it was activated on August 14th. Our trained agents answer every single call, and a number of these calls are of interest to us. 14 state attorneys general have publicly acknowledged opening investigations into clergy sex abuse of children within their jurisdiction. Their work is already having an impact. Recently, Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan released a report saying 6 Catholic dioceses in Illinois failed to disclose the names of at least 500 accused predator priests. Her preliminary findings were modeled off of our report here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Either myself or our top deputies have personally spoken to 45 state attorneys general about our clergy abuse investigation. The United States Department of Justice has opened a federal investigation of clergy abuse and, as reported, has instructed every diocese in the country to preserve documents in their possession detailing abuse allegations. Catholic dioceses across the nation have released the names of more than 1,000 priests accused of sexually abusing children, with more such disclosures expected in the coming weeks. No longer can they play hide and seek with the truth. People are now watching as a result of our work here in Pennsylvania. But while all of this is happening, one action that has not yet happened is the approval by our legislature of the reforms recommended by the grand jury to prevent this type of abuse from ever happening again here in Pennsylvania, and to give victims of clergy abuse their day in court. I want to reiterate that my team and I strongly support all 4 reforms and stand with every victim and survivor of clergy sexual abuse across this Commonwealth in endorsing them. They are, again, first, to eliminate the criminal statute of limitations for child sexual abuse, as 39 other states, the District of Columbia, and 1 territory have already done. Number 2, create a 2-year civil window so victims can recover to receive the care and treatment that they deserve. The average age of disclosure of abuse is 52 years old, and studies show that 1/3 of child victims do not disclose until adulthood. We should give them the chance to confront their abuser when they have come forward. Third, the grand jury recommended to specify that civil confidentiality agreements do not cover or prevent communications with law enforcement. The church routinely used these civil confidentiality agreements to silence victims. We want to make clear that their conversations with law enforcement should not be silenced. Fourth and finally, to clarify the penalties for a continuing failure to report child abuse. Governor Wolf has pledged his signature when these 4 reforms reach his desk. And to be clear, bills to eliminate the criminal statute of limitations for child sexual abuse have already been approved by the Pennsylvania House and by the Pennsylvania Senate, albeit at different times. Again, I strongly support each and every one of these 4 grand jury reforms, and will continue to fight to ensure each of them are passed. The House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed them. The Senate thus far has chosen not to take up each of the 4 recommendations, or to put it before its members for a vote. I am confident, as I was before the session ended and as I remain today, that if these reforms are brought up for a vote in the state Senate, they will pass. The grand jury recommended these reforms. The public supports them. A majority of legislators support them. Sadly, though predictably, The bishops in Pennsylvania are another group who have yet to support these reforms. Look, as I said before, there is a reckoning going on in this country. We've been very clear, we will hold big, powerful institutions, whoever they are, accountable for protecting their reputation instead of protecting the people entrusted in their care. The investigation into sexual abuse of children in the Catholic Church in Pennsylvania is part of that broader movement. For far too long, the practice has been to investigate the victims of abuse, not the abuser. The bravery and courage of the victims is sparking a fundamental shift in that dynamic. Today's stiff sentence directed at this predator priest is a clear statement. No one who abuses a child is above the law. No one. Because the survivors and the 23 men and women of the grand jury, 2 predator priests now sit in prison. Wherever we find child sexual abuse, in a doctor's office, as we did in Johnstown not too long ago, in a university, as we did in State College, or in places of worship or hunting cabins in Jefferson County, we're going to investigate, we're going to prosecute, we're going to hold people accountable. That is the work that our office will continue to do. I thank the survivors again for being here today, for continuing to demonstrate their bravery. I again want to commend Dan Dye, Jen Selber, Steve Adams, and the rest of our team in the Office of the Attorney General for their extraordinary work. With that, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Mr. Attorney General, the plea agreement says there could be other charges against Mr. Poulson if victims come forward. Do you have any indication there may be other victims coming forward?
I appreciate the question, but that's not something I can comment on in this setting at this time. Thank you.
Is there any plan at this point to bring charges against Bishop Troutman?
That's not something that I can comment on this time. I'll say more broadly that when we reviewed all of the evidence in the grand jury report, and as I said before, ran a statute of limitations test on each of the living 301 predator priests based on that evidence, we were only allowed to charge 2 of them because of the statute of limitations. Similarly, we ran a statute of limitations test on anyone involved in enabling or covering up that abuse. And again, because of the laws of this Commonwealth, we charged, based on the evidence we had at that time, those who could be charged. The Catholic Church, in an organized and sophisticated manner here in Pennsylvania, covered up these crimes so that they would be outside of the statute of limitations. It's why we're pushing so hard. It's why the grand jury recommended those 4 reforms in order to ensure that something like this could never happen again. That includes both the abuse and the cover.
You mentioned that it's unfortunate that the bishops have not signed off on those reforms. Can you expand on that, please?
On August 14th, when we released the grand jury report, I made it very clear that the only test as to whether or not the words from these bishops in Pennsylvania were empty or were true in meaning would be whether or not they would endorse these 4 grand jury reforms. To date, not a single bishop in Pennsylvania has said that they support these grand jury reforms. In fact, several of them have worked hard to stop them.
What does that tell you about the church or these bishops?
I don't think it is my place to opine on what it means about a particular bishop or the church writ large. There are some wonderful people in the church, and the church does some wonderful work. What I can tell you is that each of the bishops and the Archbishop of Pennsylvania have failed to meet that very, very basic test. Parishioners and the public will have to draw conclusions as to what that means.
Did the Pittsburgh Diocese ever hand over to you a file that contradicts Cardinal Worrell's statements that he was unaware of allegations against Cardinal McCarrick?
That's an interesting question and not one that is appropriate for me to answer in this setting at this time. Perhaps in the future there will be an opportunity for me to address that.
Any other questions?
Thank you all very, very much for your attention, and thank you very much for recognizing the strength of these survivors who stand up here with us today. Thank you.